everyone. This is Caroline Cook of Grand Rapids Running Tours. Thank you so much, Caroline, for leading us in this discussion today. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jen and Haley. I am so glad to be back on this beautiful summer day. We chose a perfect day to be strolling through downtown, even if it takes a little imagination. I'm looking out on beautiful puffy white clouds in a blue sky. So today we're going to be talking about, and welcome back to everybody for your third of the series, and welcome to the people I'm meeting for the first time. So today we're focusing on hospitality industry in Grand Rapids, whether it was then or now, and I call it the entertainment expedition. And just like the other two tours, we have started at Studio Park, and today we're gonna pause a little bit while we're here on their plaza, because you're standing right now in that green space that you see on your screen. This is a major player in the new Heartside neighborhood. We talked last week about the significance of the construction of the Van Andel Arena in 1996 as a catalyst for redevelopment in the Heartside neighborhood and giving birth to what we now call the Arena District as a marketing beacon for entertainment. Well, this, my friends, right here that you're looking at, Studio Park, is also a big deal in what will be known as the history of Heartside neighborhood. So let's actually go back in history a little bit. So Studio C, Celebration Cinema, Lokes Theaters. These are all names associated with this enterprise. It all started 75 years ago, so it was in 1944 when Jack Lokes purchased the historic Powers Theater on Pearl Street. It would be next to the current day Flanagan's. So when he purchased the Powers Theater on Pearl Street, he reopened it as Photo News. So Powers Theater was a theater with live acts, vaudeville, stage acts. Well, Photo News was a newsreel movie house when it opened. Again, this was 1944, and that was during World War II, when people gathered in movie houses to watch the newsreels of the war. So post-war, Photo News was renamed the Midtown Theater. And many of you might remember the name of the Midtown Theater because it was only demolished in 1979. It existed until 79. Now it was demolished to make way for one of Ellis Parking's first parking lots downtown. And I want you to remember that little fact. But by that time, Studio 28, another J.D. Lokes enterprise, had opened in 1964 on 28th Street in Clyde Park in Southwest Grand Rapids. Now that was referred to as the world's first modern megaplex, multiple screens in one place. It was a movie campus. Most of you might remember that. It operated for 43 years in that location until closing in 2007. So now, Haley, if we go back 2 screens, you'll be looking at, go back another one till our start. Yes, so that's what you're looking at right there. This is the company's, J.D. Lokes Company. It's their 12th theater complex right now. They are located in 6 cities in West and Central Michigan. Studio C, as this is called, also owns Showspan. You may not know that. They began as West Michigan Sportland Boat Show in 1946. Now they operate 14 shows in Michigan and Wisconsin. The 3rd generation JD, which is John Daniel, is currently president. Now, some history of this particular project, Studio Park. This project was 10 years in the making. What began as an opportunity to purchase some city property, of all things, a parking lot. It planted the seed of an idea of a downtown movie theater that had been missing since all the other movie theaters had moved out to the suburbs. That idea morphed into the biggest private development project in the history of Grand Rapids. All told, over $160 million for this project. Of course, the family sentiment, or what I call the family karma, is part of this story. Their Midtown theater that was demolished to make way for a parking lot, and now this masterpiece was raised from a parking lot. Their history has gone full circle. Clearly, as you look around, this was a big idea, a big, big risk, and now a big, beautiful outcome. It's a 9-screen theater, restaurants, retail, apartments, a parking lot, and a hotel. Now that's entertainment. And by the way, what you are looking at is a screen on the outside of the theater, and they call that their 10th screen because they will be collaborating with Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., with the Heartside neighborhood, with many, many partners to show movies free of charge and have events on that 10th outside screen. So now we're going to continue our walk. We're walking east on Oaks, and we're going to turn left as we walk. In your mind, you're picturing this, or your map, and we're going north on Ionia. Now, do you know why Ionia Avenue is named that? I love the history of the street names. Well, the very first plat map of Grand Rapids shows streets in Lucius Lyon's plat named for contiguous counties in this area of West Michigan. There was a Kent Street, renamed later Crescent, and that was an east-west thoroughfare north of Lyon Street. And then between Canal, which is what we call Monroe Street now, and Division, ran the north-south thoroughfares of Ottawa on the west and Ionia on the east. So we had Kent, Ionia, and Ottawa, the contiguous counties. Last week, we talked extensively about the old Union train station that stood in this neighborhood, in this area, from 1900 to 1961. Now, when these fine folks arrived from the train, they rented a carriage, or they took a carriage ride from a nearby livery, and they trotted up the street to be dropped off at the Morton house, or maybe the Pantlind Hotel that you see pictured here. And my golly, the Pantlind doesn't look that different from the outside today. But the traveler of more modest means stayed at the inexpensive hotels and the boarding houses. In the mid to late 1800s and into the next century, a row of hotels stood here on Ionia to accommodate train travelers. Now, during the golden years of the furniture industry, which was 1875 until 1930-ish, small hotels opened as a response for a need for rooms for these traveling salesmen during the twice annual furniture expositions. These small hotels were farther from the action than the larger, fancier hotels like the Pantlind and Monroe, but less expensive for the furniture buyers that were on a tight expense account. Now, let's examine 58 Ionia Southwest as an example of one such small-scale hotel aimed at the ordinary traveler. Now, this address has some notable architectural features. It was built in 1894 of red brick. Note the small bay window on the second floor. It sits over the entrance, which is an arch outlined with irregular shapes of red sandstones. The oval window on the third floor, see that tiny oval window on the third floor? If you were to take a magnifying glass and look at that carefully, or walk outside and stare up carefully, you'll notice that the window is surrounded by a decorative design that includes two dragons at the top of the design. Now, if you look higher, the gargoyles are not part of the original architecture, but I can't seem to find when they were actually added. So if anybody knows that, Gina, you can let me know when they were actually added. Perhaps they were inspired, though, by the dragons on the original design. Now, Mr. Lewis Waldron, you see that name on the screen, he was the original owner, and the building changed ownership and names many times. In 1898, it was the Wellington Hotel. In 1926, it was the Williams Hotel, and that was the first in town to be owned by an African-American family. Now, Stanley Barnett, another African-American entrepreneur, he owned the building from 1939 to 1966. It was part of the early jazz music scene in Grand Rapids, just like what we saw last week at the Lamar Hotel and Bar on Granville. Now, today, this building, it's all about tiki. It's Max's South Seas Hideaway that was opened in the year 2019. Now, other old Heartside hotels on this row include the original building at 70 Ionia, the Milner Hotel, then later renamed the Crathmore Hotel. It became the Oakway Hotel, then the Milner Oakway Hotel. Rockford Construction purchased the building, which was in very bad repair, and they rebuilt it in 2004. So if you drive by it today, you would not recognize this corner, except for you would see signage for, it says on the building, the reconstructed building, Grid 70. Now that stands for Grand Rapids Innovation and Design, and of course its street address is 70 Ionia. Now, Grid 70 is a collaborative effort. It brings together creative talent from major companies like Meyer, Amway, Mercy Health, Wolverine Worldwide. It allows for innovation in what they like to call cross-pollination. Now, to the north of that, the American House Hotel existed, and today it houses Luna Restaurant. It was sandwiched between this Oakway Hotel and the original Wellington. Now on the next slide, you're gonna see some murals. Well, you see, as we continue south on Ionia, we would be walking past a little parking lot, and you see it on the lower left corner, that would be the entrance to Stella's, okay? It has a mural on the wall, and that was originally a project funded by DGRI, and the original mural was designed by Erwin Erkfitz, and it was called Chaotic Growth, and it reflected the growth of Grand Rapids in 2010. And there are other murals throughout the area, this parking lot, and into Stella's, created by Erwin Erkfitz. But it was just announced by Dwelling Place, because they are the hosts, and also DGRI is once again funding a new mural. And you see on your left side of your screen, that is a photo of local artist Kayan Lovett, and he has been hired to spruce up this mural, which was starting to fade. He's painting a new mural to replace the existing mural. And of course, it's next to the Waldron, and it is called One Wish. And it will be painted in July. So if you're taking your walk, this month you won't see it, next month you will. Now the next building that we're passing was constructed in 1886, and it was investment by Delos Blodgett, and yes, relationship to the future Blodgett Hospital. He was a lumber baron and capitalist. You see him pictured there. Now this actual building was a multi-use building and had many small wholesalers in it as well. The first floor had retail spaces, and each office suite had an elevator for the convenience of the tenants. That was very productive. There were fireproof vaults in the basement for storage of valuable papers. Suites of offices were fitted out on the upper floors, including one for Mr. Blodgett's own business operations. Now here's a fun memory. This, you see photographed, is Putnam candy, the mint lozenges. Well, the Putnam Candy Company for many years was one of Michigan's largest candy producers, and it opened its first modern candy factory in part of this building. Now, this mint lozenge, if any of you remember, they were often referred to as church mints. You see, they were sold in a tin, so they weren't individually wrapped, so they wouldn't make crinkling noises when you opened them in church. And there was a tradition in the Dutch Reformed Church that you had a mint as you settled into hearing the sermon. Now, let me tell you a quick story about the building across the street now. A man named Fred Hirth and his nephew, Gustav Adolf Kraus, came to Grand Rapids in 1883. They were skilled tanners of leather. They bought a small leather shop and established a hide, leather, and wholesale shoe business right here. In 1898, they built this structure to accommodate their steady business growth. In 1901, they moved to Rockford, where they added a larger tannery. Are you guessing what this is the home of? In 1923, all company operations moved from Grand Rapids to Rockford, and this, my dear friends, is the start of Wolverine Worldwide. And that is why the condos above the first floor retail are called Tannery Row. Wonder how many of you knew that. Now, we're going back across the street, and one particular brewery with a tie to Grand Rapids past is the Grand Rapids Brewing Company. That's today's Grand Rapids Brewing Company. Now, this location was opened December 5th, 2012, the same day that Prohibition was repealed in 1933 on December 5th. It was exactly also 120 years after the very first Grand Rapids Brewing Company opened its doors. Now, what you see on the screen in front of you is the original Grand Rapids Brewing Company that opened its doors in the late 1800s. That was located on Michigan in Ionia. It would later become the Fox Deluxe Brewing Campus. So I didn't want you to confuse the original location with today's location at Grand Rapids Brewing Company. So today's location on Ionia and Fulton, it was actually set in an 1884 wholesale grocery building. And we've been talking about the last few weeks. So today's Grand Rapids Brewing Company is Michigan's first and only USDA certified all organic brewery, paying homage to the original Grand Rapids Brewing Company when, of course, everything was organic. Now the brewery, today's brewery, consumes nearly all of the organic hops produced in Michigan. The business was opened by Mark Seller's company, Barfly Ventures. And of course, they own Hop Cat, which opened in 2008, Stella's Lounge, opened in 2009, and then of course the Max's South Seas Hideaway that we mentioned earlier in 2019. Now, nearly every part of the reconstruction of the new brewery is from repurposed material. The floorboards are made from scrapped wood. The long community style tabletops are made from a reconditioned floor joist. The west windows were salvaged from the Center Point Mall demolition. The 120-year-old brick lining the bar and staircase came from elsewhere inside the building. Now, the logo of today's Grand Rapids Brewing Company came from a high-resolution transfer of an original turn-of-the-century Grand Rapids Brewing Company advertisement. See, it's the same logo that you see up in the upper left-hand corner. And that was in the archives of the Grand Rapids Public Museum. Now, really fun when you go into Grand Rapids Brewing Company today, a mural of this campus of the original Grand Rapids Brewing Company adorns a wall in the bar. So also you will see today, the beers are named for the city founders like Lucius Lyon, John Ball, Louis Campo, Rix Robinson, as well as founding partners of the original Grand Rapids Brewing Company. The iconic pre-prohibition flagship brand, which is, and you see it on your screen, it was called Silver Foam. It was a lager, and it's still served today. And by the way, as I mentioned, this building was originally constructed as the wholesale grocery firm Hawkins and Perry, which, by the way, specialized in teas and syrups. Don't you love the Phillips 66 in the foreground of the photograph on the left? So now we're turning right. We're going east on Fulton, so we're starting up the hill, and then we're going to take a quick right or south on Commerce. We're going to be walking along the west side of the street. Now I'm going to point out first on the southwest corner of Division and Fulton is the UICA of Kendall College of Design and Ferris State University, UICA. Well, they just announced this week on 6/21 that they are moving into the old Federal Building, or as some of you remember it as the old Grand Rapids Art Museum. They are moving into that building to save costs as a result of the COVID epidemic. The building just became too large and too expensive to maintain. They will in fact remain temporarily closed until spring of 2021. They had opened this location in 2011. Prior to that, they were housed where the ArtPrice headquarters are located today off of Sheldon. So I don't know yet what's going to happen to this UICA building. On top of it are lots of apartments and a parking structure that will continue, but I don't know what's going to happen here. But at any rate, UICA is the uber hip spot in Grand Rapids, and it is Michigan's largest contemporary art center. It provides changing art exhibits, independent films, arts and craft classes for adults and kids, and community events. It is, of course, the busiest corner of the city. In fact, it's the exact center of town, 0000. Unlike the Grand Rapids Art Museum, though, this is a non-collecting art center. So, attached, as I mentioned, are the apartments that opened in 2010, 56 of them. Now imagine this same corner, this same space, and this is what I love doing, peeling back the layers. You're time traveling again The year is 1887. You'd be looking at a fashionable 4-story residential family hotel. Family hotel. This was the Cody family. Okay? They built this hotel, gave the building its family name in 1893. The first name was actually the Warwick Hotel. Now, Buffalo Bill Cody, I think you've probably heard of that name. He was a cousin of the Grand Rapids family, and he was a frequent guest. He provided the huge buffalo heads which once adorned the hotel's lobbies. The hotel was raised in 1958. Back when there were no suburban shopping malls, West Michiganders came to downtown Grand Rapids to spend their hard-earned money. And shopping is a form of entertainment, retail therapy. There were 3 grand stores, Wurzburg, Steckety's, and Herpolsheimer's department store. Now, sadly, Herpolsheimer's closed in 1990, but that's a really long run. It ended a 120-year retail tradition. The current chapter in the life of this building, though, for Herpolsheimer's, is the home of the Grand Rapids Police Department. The department itself was established in 1871, after the establishment of the fire department, which shows you priorities in the days of wooden buildings. Well, the police department has grown to become the 2nd largest police department in Michigan. There are over 300 uniformed personnel and 80 plus civilian employees. They handle approximately 150,000 calls each year. We are continuing our walk. We're passing by a delicious bake shop window, a today's bake shop window. And you would see that would be today on the edge, the right side of your screen. And back then it would have been located right there on that corner, the left side. And the name, however, that building, by the way, was called New Hotel Mertens. And the name, however, is not new at all to us today, but it's still called New Hotel Mertens. The hotel with the same name opened here at 35 Oaks Street, originally in 1914. At that time, New Hotel Mertens served as a hotel where many visitors to Grand Rapids stayed after departing the Union Station. The hotel remained active for well over 60 years, but as downtown Grand Rapids began to suffer from blight in the 70s and the 1980s, the hotel eventually became Heartside Manor, is what it was called. And it was described as, quote, a place for the downtrodden, end quote. And later it closed entirely. Now, the original hotel housed this way cool dining room and cocktail bar in the same space as today's new restaurant. So, in the remodeling of today's new restaurant, the mission was to adapt and restore many of the original features as possible. For example, the wood flooring of the restaurant is original. The brick lining around one of the restaurant's windows was chipped away rather than plastered over, and an electrical conduit along the walls was left exposed. There's also some graffiti left on the wall, likely from its abandoned years. It's still visible on one of the dining room columns. The new restaurant is modeled after a traditional brasserie, which is a type of casual French restaurant. You are invited to try the ground floor dining. Then they have this incredible pastry counter, a bakery, a bar, and they have a rooftop bar with exceptional views of the city, especially the Heartside neighborhood. So this is something old, made new, preserving the past. So what else exactly did we do for fun and entertainment in a bygone era? How about roller skating? Across the street is a neat old building at 118 Commerce. It is called the Heystek Building. Mr. Heystek constructed this building in 1910. It cost him $50,000. It's built of brick, stone, and ornamental terracotta with a hard maple floor. Its original uses were roller skating, cattle shows, prize fights, political speeches, marathon dances, and convention-type gatherings. It had balconies on 3 sides, and it accommodated 800 skaters or 3,500 seats. Now, until the Civic Auditorium was constructed in the early 1930s, this was one of the few large venues for public gatherings. Theodore Roosevelt campaigned here in 1917. Now, here's an interesting fact. Because Commerce had no access to the streetcar line, which would be behind this building on Division, there was an elegant, elevated walkway, now demolished, from the entrance to the Coliseum to Division. Robert Smith Motor Company purchased the building in 1947 for an auto parts stockroom. It has also been used as a parking garage. Isn't that just hard to imagine? And a rent-a-car business. Today, the United Way offices call this building home. And boy, have they done a beautiful job once again preserving the past and all that elegant terracotta detail, including those magnificent lions. There is another building, by the way, at 19 LaGrave Southeast, which was once home to a roller rink, up on the 5th floor. So if you were out walking, you wouldn't be walking at this point in time right past this building. But I just wanted to make sure you knew there was another great roller rink up on the 5th floor of this building. Today, that roller rink has been transformed into, if you wondered why it was called this, High Five Grand Rapids. They offer what is now a loft-style wedding venue in an old roller rink. With expansive, contemporary, and versatile space, plus scenic views, once again, of the city, and a very contemporary feel in an old space, it is one of downtown's newest hotspots for events. And it can seat up to 300 people, so when you're planning your next wedding. Now, art. We're back to Commerce Street. Art is also entertainment. You will see, tucked beside Cooley Law School, a beautiful mural. And you can't believe it. You could probably drive by this and not notice it because it's tucked between Cooley Law School to the north and the parking structure to the south. Artist Picardo Erick titled the piece he created, Celebrating Diversity. This mural is sponsored by Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. and Mobile GR through an Activate This Place grant. It was completed in 2019. Definitely worth a look. Now we're gonna turn left as we head west on Cherry, and right on that corner on our way to Division, you pass, the Douglas J. Aveda Institute. That's what you see. That's what's in your mind. But look up and check out what's on the building. This was at one point in time the U.S. Post Office Parcel Post Building. It was not a big, shall we call it, pedestrian post office like the one that was at the Fed building. This was built in 1927 for the purpose of holding and distribution of package mail. Now, no longer in use after the new post office was built on Michigan Avenue. They consolidated space on Michigan Avenue right on the river. In 1963, that's when the new post office was built. The building here, this Parcel Post building, was gutted and used as a parking area by United Way in 1999. United Way sold it in 2006 to Douglas J. Aveda Institute. Ha ha! So now we're at the corner of Division and Cherry. Here we are at Pekich Park. This little park is one of 74 parks, proud 74 parks in the Grand Rapids Parks system. Now, since our earliest years as a village, Grand Rapidians flocked to city parks for recreation and entertainment. This space is one of the newest. It opened in just 2010. It honors the Reverend Barbara Pekich, who headed the Heartside ministry before her death. It provides a gathering place with seating and a shelter, and now a community garden. It's managed by Dwelling Place, but maintained by Heartside neighbors. It was actually constructed as part of a street improvement project to realign that intersection, that crazy intersection of Cherry and South Division. So what you would be standing on if you are standing in the center of that park was once part of Cherry Street. Now note that beautiful Furniture City mural. The 2004, it's called a mural that's tromp l'oeil in French, which is a visual illusion in art used to trick the eye into perceiving a painted detail as a three-dimensional object. Whoa, did they accomplish that? That looks like you are stepping through that arch right into old Grand Rapids. Now, it was created again in 2004 by Richard Haas. It shows a time lapse, actually, of the history surrounding the lumber and furniture industry from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. A treasure. Now, there is a sign in the park, a plaque that talks about the platting of our streets, our crazy street system. So I thought here I would talk a moment about that. What you see on the screen is an overhead view of our street system. And so it's very clear when you're on Monroe Center that there's a series of streets that are angles, and the majority of the streets are perpendicular to each other. Well, I'm going to have a quote for you, okay? Quote, "Countless curses have been heaped upon the man who created the maze of streets in the triangle that has Fulton Street as its baseline on the south and Monroe and the river as its two other sides. The tale of the tangled thoroughfare is a taut little drama with two lead characters, the mercurial and vigorous Campo and that excellent man, Lucius Lyon." You see, basically, in 1831, Lucius Campo purchased land bounded by Fulton on the south and Michigan on the north between Division and the river when it became available by the US government, and this would be the early 1830s. 1 year later, Lucius Lyon purchased land northward from Michigan to Colebrook Street, from the river eastward to roughly Bostwick Avenue and southward to Wealthy. He boxed in Campo's land. But there was bitterness between the two men. Campo platted his land on right angles to the river and the existing Monroe and called it the village of Grand Rapids. Lyon planted his land squarely on the compass and called it the village of Kent. Well, Campo eventually won that feud, and it was called Grand Rapids. Now, all of this neat information is taken from a book, A Look at Early Grand Rapids by Z.Z. Leidens, written in 1966. So, turn left on Division. We're going north. Now, in our naming of the streets, Division Avenue is so named because the area was first settled along this corridor. It marks the dividing line between the townships of Grand Rapids and Walker, north of Hall Street, and between the townships of Paris and Wyoming, south of Hall Street. The most productive and active era of Division Avenue occurred between 1900 and the end of World War II. It was a primary business corridor into Grand Rapids. Now, historically, did you know that our reputation before 1850 was for being exceedingly muddy? The muddy, muddy village. Wagons were often overturned or were mired in this mud. A few streets had wooden sidewalks for pedestrians, and otherwise, beware the filth and inconvenience of living beside a marshy riverbank is what we did. So Division was called the Kalamazoo Road, south of the city border, The planking of this road was a first for our region. It was called the Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids Plank Road Company, that was incorporated under an act of the state legislature in 1850. The road was completed in 1855. The company did the grading of Division at its own expense, charging tolls along the route, though there was no toll gate in the city. The tolls were taken south of the city. The first toll station was at the corner of Wealthy and Division. Because Kalamazoo had railroads by that time, the Plank Road was in essence a spur to the railroad in Grand Rapids, and how nearly all visitors from the east approached the city. These weary travelers arrived on the bumpy Plank Road. We got rid of the mud, but we earned bumps. They entered the city by the south from turning at the corner of Division and Monroe. Perhaps they were staying at the old National Hotel, which became the Morton House. The journey would have been broken by several relay points for change of horses. It was an arduous, hours-long, jerky and jostling mode of transportation, but an enormous improvement over the muddy road. The arrival of the railroad in Grand Rapids curtailed the stagecoach travel. Our next building we're looking at is the Donovan Building. And this is at the northwest corner of Division and Oaks. It was built in 1911 on the site of the former Kalamazoo House hostelry, if I'm saying the word correctly, hotel. It was once a popular overnight destination for stagecoach travelers. It was operated in the 1870s and the 1880s by Gabriel Salyers. The three-story brick structure that you see today was built for the T.R. Donovan Clothing Company, which had started in this original structure, and that was a Detroit clothier. It was occupied for many years by Wetman's Formal Wear. The building was purchased in 1997 by local dentist Erick English for $275,000. While the first floor is retained as retail space, the upper two floors have been converted into 12 apartments. Now we're going to talk about beer again as we continue this journey, this entertainment expedition. And we're going to the site of George Brandt, and that's a picture of George Brandt in the lower right corner. And he opened Union Brewing. And you're going to recognize the Harris Building. Well, this is the site of Union Brewing. Now, the Union in the brewery's name was chosen in support of the Union side in the conflict because it was opened in 1861 during the Civil War. Like most of the breweries in Grand Rapids at that time, the Union primarily brewed a type of lager beer, especially favored by the city's growing German-American population. Now, the Union Brewery operated independently until 1893, when it became one of the 6 breweries which consolidated to form, and now we're coming full circle, the Grand Rapids Brewing Company. Now, they consolidated that year to combat the influence of distribution of beers from outside of Grand Rapids. Remember our last tour? We looked at the Anheuser-Busch Ice House. So now all the facts are coming together. But the rich history of this actual site goes on. A new building was constructed that you see here in 1892 on the site of the former brewery. The first floor retail space featured furniture showrooms, and the second and third floor were known as Eureka Lodge Number 2 for members of a secret fraternal organization called the Knights of Pythias. Note the special window. It's round and has the triangular symbol. That's of the Knights of Pythias. Now, in addition to the offices and formal meeting rooms, the second floor features an expansive domed ballroom with 18-foot ceilings. The third floor's skylight illuminated hallways once led to bedroom suites where the lodge members could entertain their female guests. The Harris Sample Furniture Company moved into the first floor in 1909 and would continue to operate in this location for the next 60 years. Each year, in the spring and fall, furniture buyers from across the country would converge in Grand Rapids, the furniture city, to view and purchase from the new lines, which were shown through sample pieces at the Exhibitors Building and various other furniture showrooms. Now, Philip Klingman conceived the idea of purchasing these samples to save out-of-town manufacturers the shipping charges. These out-of-town manufacturers would ship the furniture to show during the expositions, but they didn't want to be saddled with the expense of shipping them back. So Philip Klingman bought their samples. Of course, Klingman's department store. After Klingman's sample furniture opened, other companies followed suit, such as the Harris Sample Furniture Company. They closed their doors in 1969. In the following decades, the building would house a variety of retailers and charities until unfortunately falling into disrepair in the early 2000s. But it was in the late 2000s, South Division began its transformation into the Avenue for the Arts. And so now that building, the Harris Building, is a beautiful venue. They're doing fabulous things inside that building. It's been spared and brought back to life. So also this transformation along Division as the Avenue of the Arts, dwelling place of Grand Rapids, has been front and center of promoting and supporting the arts district as a place to live and work within a creative community. Now, as we stroll up Division, you will see an increasingly vibrant street with numerous artist galleries and public artwork, such as the Rad American Women A to Z project, which debuted in spring 2019. And we will have more walking tours of that, by the way, this August. We're working on it. The painted signal boxes feature one of 26 women who made an impact on our American history based upon a children's book written by Kate Schatz. The project was sponsored by Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. At one point in time, South Division was a very, very busy commercial street that was home to some of the legendary Grand Rapids restaurants, bars, and grocery stores. And I bet some of you are remembering these places. For examples, it is where Brands and G.B. Russo's earned their start. Can you remember any others? Located in the north half of the first floor of the McMullen Building at 21 Division was a club called Club 21. It was a prominent night spot operating from the 1930s at least through the 1940s. The 1948 city directory entry reads, Grand Rapids' only theater restaurant, fine food, the best in entertainment right from Broadway, new and modern interior, a friendly atmosphere that is so enjoyable, we have a reservation for you. Fozzie S. Yared was the owner. On Saturday afternoon, families with children would enjoy a suitable for family floor show. Now, do these other entertainment spots ring a bell? Wes Ramey's Sports Bar was at 7 South Division, Schmidt's Show Bar, 41 to 43 South Division, and Snook's Billiards. Now, we are going to be concluding our talk today on the southeast corner of This would be Division and Fulton. Another famous hotel in Grand Rapids history, the Livingston Hotel. Now, because most of the workers and the travelers in Heartside were single males, they populated the many hotels in the neighborhood. But segregation and discrimination led to a 1919 civil rights suit brought against the Livingston Hotel for refusing to serve 3 African-American pastors. This was the first civil lawsuit, but not the last local case intended to address racial injustice in Grand Rapids. The 6-story brick building burned on the night of April 1, 1924, with the loss of 7 lives and numerous injuries. After the walls were torn down, the foundation and the ruins of the hotel remained as a grim reminder of the fire for many, many years. It was a sad occasion. The burning of the Livingston Hotel, though, it ultimately made possible the widening of Division Avenue. In 1927, the city undertook a massive street widening project between Fulton and Wealthy Avenue. At that time, Division was the city's most traveled roadway. The plan was intended to create more space for buses and cars that were gradually replacing, of course, the streetcars. Construction workers removed the old sidewalks, the streetcar rails, and nearly 17 feet from the face of the buildings on the east side of the street. So that's why when you're taking this walk or driving down Division and you look carefully at the buildings, you will notice that the fronts of the buildings on the east side look more modern than the fronts of the building on the west, which are the original construction. So I have taken up the full hour, and we have officially concluded the presentation for today, and that was a focus on hospitality and entertainment. And of course, next week or 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about historic habitation, or a focus on living. And I thank you all for tuning in today.
All right, everybody. So we are unable to give Caroline a full round of applause, but I just want to encourage you to put a thank you or a comment in the Zoom chat to thank you for her feedback. It looks like Jamie has their hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you, Jamie, or ask that you unmute yourself and maybe ask your question, or put it in the chat if you have a question there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Jamie says that was an accident. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We just really want to thank our community partners. We do have we have 3 upcoming tours. So our next one is July 8th, Historic Habitation, a focus on living. I'm going to post the link for the tours again into the chat box. Please make sure that you sign up for each tour individually. The tours, we do track the tour attendance by your survey feedback. So if you are one of the people who is trying to attend all of the tours and qualify for one of the gift certificates, please ensure that you complete the survey. Please provide feedback about what you'd like to see different in the future through the survey as well. And of course, your round of applause for Caroline in the comment section. Thank you all for joining us. If you have questions, happy to try and answer them as we are wrapping up the call today. And if there's something that you'd like to see featured in the future, please add it in the event. So,
Thank you, Gina, for the gargoyle information. I'm so excited to